welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today we're here to talk about 1973's The Exorcist, and its brand new 4K Blu-ray that just came out from Warner Brothers. So The Exorcist was directed by William Fredkin, who recently just passed away, one of the greatest directors of all time. It was written by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote the 1971 novel that this is based on. And The Exorcist is one of the most famous horror films of all time, if not the greatest horror film of all time, just based on what happened back in 1973 when this film came out. It shocked the world. You know, the world was a lot more religious back then than it is now. So to see something like this on the screen, something that seemed so realistic, really shocked people back then. I mean, people were fainting in the aisles, people were throwing up, and that's honestly what made this film so big. It ended up getting an R rating, so it ended up becoming a huge moneymaker for Warner Brothers back in 1973. On a budget of just $12 million, which was a lot back in 1973, it ended up making $428 million at the box office. Just such a huge hit. And honestly, they weren't able to capitalize on that. The second film was really, really bad. One of the worst films I've ever seen, just because it's just so boring. The ultimate sin of a film. But The Exorcist 3 is a great film and a great follow-up. That one's actually directed by William Peter Blatty, who, wrote this movie and wrote the book. But The Exorcist is still a film that holds up to this very day, and I credit a lot of that to William Friedkin's direction. William Friedkin really was one of the greatest directors we ever had, and he wasn't appreciated for what he did. He had a unique style about his movies. They all felt so realistic, almost like documentaries. If you look at movies like The French Connection, Sorcerer, or even movies like 1980's Cruising, he had a certain style, a certain edginess to him. Especially, in the 1970s, they were edgy and they were going for a more realistic approach, but I think William Friedkin really nailed that style, and he really captured that with this movie. It feels horrific for a reason. It just feels so real. It follows around a girl, Linda Blair plays Reagan in this movie, who gets possessed by a demon. And her mother, played by the great Ellen Burstyn, who does a fantastic job in this movie, she's worried about her daughter. She's not an overly religious person, so she takes her daughter to doctors, wondering why is she getting these big anger swings in her? What's going on with her? She's just not herself anymore. And they're trying to bring logic and reason to this. Like, hey, must be something with her frontal lobe. We'll exercise every single effort we can in the medical industry, then we'll go to a psychiatrist, and if that doesn't work, well, then our last-ditch effort is something that has worked in the past, but not something that we like to go to, and that's, you know what, let's find a priest and get this girl an exorcism, and maybe that'll work. Not because we believe in religion, just because of the placebo effect, essentially, in the sense that she will be tricked into believing that the demon is out of her body, and she'll go back to normal. Makes sense, makes all the sense in the world, and that's how we end up with Father Karras, played by Jason Miller, who's actually Jason Patric's father, if you didn't know that, and Jason Patric's grandfather is Jackie Gleason, so that kid comes from a very famous family, and I love Jason Patric, even in Speed 2. But Jason Miller plays Father Karras, a man who's lost his faith. He doesn't believe in it anymore. Everything that's gone wrong for him, his life didn't go the way he thought it would go. He's also a psychiatrist and having to hear everybody else's issues, and he doesn't feel like he can help them anymore. And he wants to, probably leave the cloth. After his mother passes away and he wasn't with her, he feels that guilt as well, and it's just weighing down on him. He feels like a lost man. But after Lieutenant Kinderman, played by Lee J. Cobb in this movie, he would be replaced by George C. Scott in The Exorcist 3 when they explore Lieutenant Kinderman's relationship with Father Dwyer. Now, this is actually one big plot hole, I think, in The Exorcist 3 that I never really put together. Lee J. Cobb is 61 years old in this movie. The Exorcist 3 comes out 17 years later, which would make, if you go by this logic, would make him about 78 years old in that movie. And George C. Scott does a great Lee J. Cobb impersonation, essentially, like really playing Kinderman the same way that Lee J. Cobb plays it in this movie. It's just, I have to ask the question, if he's 78 years old, why is he still on the force? It doesn't look like he's aged. Father Dyer has definitely aged by the time we get to The Exorcist 3, but for some reason, George C. Scott's still on the job at almost 80 years old, and they never acknowledge that he's that old. But in this film, Kinderman lets Father Karras know about, he thinks that something strange happened in that house. The film that Ellen Burstyn's character is working on, the director of that film, her close friend, fell out the window and his head turned fully around on him, and something seems strange about that to Lieutenant Kinderman, and he decides, you know what, maybe you want to look into this. And at that same time, Father Dyer, who has a friendship with Ellen Burstyn's character, tells her about Father Karras and what he's going through and how the loss of his mother. And then eventually she goes to Father Karras, asks him for help about getting her daughter an exorcism. Even if she doesn't believe in it, she will try anything she possibly could to help her daughter. And Father Karras comes in there, and because he's just lost his faith, he's skeptical every which way, despite seeing some of the craziest things you've ever seen in your life. If you saw and heard some of the stuff that comes out of this young girl's mouth, I think immediately you would go, okay, let's at least try the exorcism, because this is some crazy shit. And, he's still skeptical. I threw holy water on her, and, the demon's reacting and everything to it, but it wasn't holy water. It was just tap water. So right away, he's a little bit skeptical, but then he decides to go to his boss, who has to kiss the ring when he leaves the room. I'm never going to work for somebody if I have to kiss their ring. That's just right away for me. I'm out. But he tells the guy, I think we should do the exorcism. And he's like, okay, all right, we'll do it. And then they have a meeting, and they're like, all right, well, let's bring in somebody who has experience with this. We had seen Max von Sydow very early in the movie in the Iraq opening, but now he's coming back and we get that classic silhouette shot where he gets out of the cab and he's walking into the McNeil household and he's ready to do an exorcism. He's done this before, so he's just doing it by the book. He's trying to get Father Karras in the right mindset, like, hey, we got to go in there, we got to do this. Just know that she's going to attack you psychologically, not physically, although she does attack physically as well. So she's going to say everything she possibly can to get under your skin. You cannot react to that. Of course, Father Karras cannot control himself when they get in the room, and this is where we get some of the most famous scenes in the entire film, with Reagan just puking that green pea soup stuff everywhere. And Max von Sydow in this movie is fantastic. Max von Sydow is always fantastic, but they really age him up in this movie with the makeup. He's only 44 years old in this movie, and he does not look it. They did a good job making him look like a man, because they do point out that he's an older man. He's been through a lot. To have him aged up so well to about a 75-year-old man is very, very good makeup. The weight can look a little off at times, especially with the new 4K Blu-ray, but this entire scene is fantastic, and what a way to end a movie. It is scary, shot so beautifully, and that's another thing. The cinematography of this movie is just outstanding. The score it's a classic score, one of the best horror scores ever. Great sound effects, great editing. It's just a phenomenal film that builds up to a great ending. We build the tension throughout this entire film, and you're never bored. I know that the first time I saw this film, I felt a little off about the first third of the movie. I thought that the pacing was very slow. As I continue to rewatch the movie, though, I appreciate that stuff more and more, and I just absolutely love this entire film through and through. Everybody gives a phenomenal performance in this movie. This movie is still scary to this very day. Now, I don't really get scared in many horror movies, and I'll be honest, this is one that doesn't really get under my skin. But I think I chalk that up to I'm not a very religious person, so anything to do with religion doesn't really scare me too much. But it's still done so well, and if you are a religious person, this movie will scare the absolute hell out of you. And it's still just a great, well-made, entertaining movie, surprisingly, that still holds up to this very day, 50 years later. And there's also a great director's cut of this movie that we're going to talk about in the 4K Blu-ray review, which we should probably dive into right now. But if you haven't seen The Exorcist, you absolutely have to do it. You will love this movie, I can guarantee it. So even if you can't check out this 4K Blu-ray, definitely check out The Exorcist. But before we dive into this 4K Blu-ray review, if you are a fan of movie reviews, 4K Blu-ray reviews, lists, podcasts, and shorts, nothing would help this channel out more than by just simply liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Well, here it is, The Exorcist on 4K Blu-ray. I opted to get this slipcover edition with Reagan on the cover and pea soup green Exorcist writing. One of the worst slipcovers I have ever seen come out from Warner Brothers, but they also gave us a steelbook, which I don't really love, but there is a really nice collector's edition that you can pre-order off of Amazon right now. That is probably the best edition of this. That's where you get the classic artwork, which I really think they should have used on the poster to begin with, or on the cover of this, because it's one of the most iconic movie posters in film history, and that shot with Max von Sydow silhouetted is one of the most beautiful shots in film history. Actually, he shot that on his first day on set, so they captured that in perfect silhouette with the smoke from the taxi. Just love that shot. And instead they opted to go with this. This is what they chose for one of their most famous films in their catalog. But no big deal, that's a minor complaint. It's just the slipcover. So we'll slide that off, same artwork underneath. You come inside, and that's two 4K Blu-ray discs, and I actually think that's really awesome. So what you get on the one disc, the black disc, is going to be your theatrical cut of the 4K, and then the second disc, that like gold disc, I don't know why they opted for that color for that either, but whatever, that's going to be your director's cut. And I feel like The Exorcist has one of the best director's cuts out there, and I'm really glad that they chose to put that in 4K Blu-ray. I actually thought it was going to be on Blu-ray. I didn't expect it to be in 4K. Really surprised me, and I'm so glad that they did that, because I really do believe that the director's cut of this film is actually better than the theatrical cut. It just fleshes out stuff a lot better. We get an alternate ending, which leads perfectly into The Exorcist 3. You really want to see that there, and I'm really glad that that's the ending they choose. Now, my only issue with the director's cut is actually one of the most famous scenes that was added back into the film in the director's cut, and that is the spider crawl down the stairs with the blood coming out of her mouth. I actually love that scene, and William Peter Blatty wanted to cut that because he felt like it was too early in the film. I actually feel the same way. Every time I watch the director's cut, I'm like, after you saw that, that should be it. It's over. We know that we need an exorcism, but she's still getting help from psychiatrists, from doctors. The father still hasn't said that we have to do an exorcism yet. So I do feel like it's too early in the movie. As scary as that scene is, it's one of the scariest scenes in the movie. I do feel like that's something that it doesn't entirely work in the placement of the film, and I actually understand why it was cut. And if I was making the choice, I would actually cut that scene as well. Even as good as it is, it just doesn't fit where it's placed in the director's cut. But that's my only flaw with the director's cut. I still feel like that is the better version of the film. And if you were asking me which one you should watch, I would definitely pick disc 2 and watch that. Now, the only thing is, on the theatrical cut, that's where you're going to get an introduction from William Fredkin, which is really awesome, and that's really your only extra other than a couple commentary tracks. The theatrical cut has a couple commentary tracks, while the director's cut only has one commentary track, so you got to make sure you go disc to disc to check that out. Other than that, though, there are no extras on here, which is one of my biggest complaints overall with anything that doesn't have any extras on it, especially from Warner Brothers. They seem to be opting to do this a lot now. Now, we got 2 discs in here, and I feel like the file size of the whole film, they didn't want to put extras on there and not drag down the quality of the audio and the visuals, which I can appreciate, but I really would have liked something, some sort of featurette, making of documentaries. This has one of the most famous stories about making of this film. People thought that this film was cursed, it's dealing with religion. You really would like to dive into all that, everything that happened on set, with the sets being extremely cold, and what these actors had to go through, what Linda Blair had to go through. It would have been really cool to find all that stuff out with an awesome making of documentary, but of course we didn't get that here on the 4K Blu-ray disc, so that's always going to be a complaint from me. I know not a lot of people care about extras, they're just there for the quality of disc, but I really care about extras. I really love to dive into the film as much as possible. I mean, I get that's just the icing on the cake, but I really want that icing, and I would really like some sort of featurette, some sort of new interviews, anything, even past interviews. You could have just used the old stuff. You didn't have to go out of your way to get new stuff, but just anything would have been nice. It's just very frustrating we didn't get any of that. But do they make it up with the visuals and the audio? Yes, they do. So like I said, you get 2 4K discs in here, so the director's cut and the theatrical cut get brand new 4K scans, and they are just absolutely gorgeous. Are they flawless? No. I would say for the most part, it's beautiful. I think that they definitely warmed it up a little bit as far as the color temperature goes. And if you guys saw Cool Hand Luke's 4K from earlier in the year, it looks very similar to what they did with this 4K. Like, there's a scene in the basement where you have, like, one light lighting the basement. It reminded me so much of Cool Hand Luke and how the light is just more vibrant in that movie, in the prison, how it's just got swinging lights in that jail in Cool Hand Luke. And the lighting looks very similar, so you could just tell that Warner Brothers has their own style of bringing these movies to 4K Blu-ray, and I really think it works for me personally. I really love what Warner Brothers does with their scans. They don't use Dolby Vision, but they just use HDR10, and I think it works. Whatever they're doing there, it's done phenomenally. I really do love the style of their 4K Blu-rays. You could definitely tell when it's a Warner Brothers 4K just from the way the colors look, how vibrant they are, how deep the blacks get. They just have their own style, and I really do appreciate that. Now, there are certain scenes where the grain is very noticeable, or it might look a little bit blurrier, especially like early in the Iraq scenes, which look gorgeous when you first jump into them, but then at certain parts they will cut to a different shot, and it'll look a lot more blurry, and the resolution dips, and it just looks a lot more fuzzy, and that happens a couple times throughout the movie, but that's really just source material. You can 100% tell they just couldn't clean it up. They did the best they could, but the source material probably wasn't there because they wouldn't just purposely put in an unfinished scene. It's just because the source material wasn't the greatest. They couldn't clean it up as well as they could, but they did a great job with it. Overall, the visuals are just absolutely stunning. I mean, I turned to my wife like 3 times and I'm like, I can't believe how good this looks. Looked absolutely stunning on my LG C2 TV last night. I just could not believe how good it looked. Like I said, though, there are going to be some scenes that kind of come out of nowhere and are going to surprise you a little bit with their visuals, but it's not anything that's going to take you out of the film. Now, the audio, we get a brand new Dolby Atmos track, and my God, that is a great Atmos track. They do such a good job with it. Like I said, one of the most famous scores in film history. All that stuff is going to make great use of all your speakers. A lot of good sound effects in this movie as well. And you hear all the stuff moving around the room, like when the dresser's moving, you might hear it from different angles. They just did a great job with the Atmos track, really spreading it around. And wow, it's mixed just so well. You know, I've complained in the past, like, you know, sometimes the dialogue track is lower than everything else. No, everything is mixed perfectly. You set the volume at whatever volume you want to watch this movie at, and you will be fine. You don't have to worry about it. It's just a great mix. I mean, they did a great job, Warner Brothers, in this Dolby Atmos track. You get that on both the director's cut and on the theatrical cut. And, you know, it's just weird how they label things in their menu, Warner Brothers. So it's just going to say English, and then it's going to say whatever other languages are. And that's how you choose your audio track. I would have liked them to list it a little bit better, kind of like what Paramount does, but it's just a minor complaint about their menu system. Overall, though, the menu system isn't laggy, so I can't complain too much, especially some of these movies have some of the worst menu systems out there, but just wanted to bring that up. So overall, I am very happy with the Exorcist 4K Blu-ray. The only thing that I really can complain about is the slipcover is just not the best looking, and the discs are a little bit plain Jane, and of course, having no extras really does disappoint me. But if you're a fan of commentary tracks, the fact that you get 2 of them on here is definitely a plus, so I can't say the extras are a total failure, but I'm just a little bit upset we couldn't get anything else for the extras fans that are there like me. And the visuals are not perfect, but they're still pretty damn good. So how would I rate this 4K Blu-ray on a score of 1 to 10? I would still give this a really solid 8.5 out of 10. I can definitely recommend it, especially if you're a fan of this film. I'm really happy that we got 2 4K discs with the director's cut, the theatrical cut. That is something we very rarely get, even from Scream Factory, who usually never holds back. For the most part, they will give the theatrical cut, the 4K treatment, and then the director's cut, the TV versions, they will just come out on Blu-ray, maybe even with new scans, but they will not opt for the 4K disc. So they get bonus points, Warner Brothers, for doing this, because most people, I think, prefer the director's cut. That's the one I would prefer, other than some minor complaints about it. That's the definitive edition of The Exorcist, and this is the new definitive edition of physical media for The Exorcist, so I can definitely recommend it. And if you guys want to grab this, I never bring it up, but we do have an Amazon affiliates link. I leave that in the description below. If you want to grab it through there, it really does help the channel out if you want to keep supporting us. You know, they give us a little bit of a kickback. It's not much, but hey, anything helps. And if you guys really want to keep supporting the channel, the thing that helps us out the most is just by you simply liking this video, subscribing to the channel, getting out in those streets, hopefully not of Georgetown, and tell your friends about us. And we'll be seeing you around.